How does one find the capacity to love amid naked hatred? Today, on Valentine's Day, at Main Bhi Muslim, Sabika and I, Mariam, speak to Indian author, columnist, and filmmaker Natasha Badwar on what it means to live by the doctrine of love that keeps getting redefined in light of new relationships, challenges, and opportunities as we grow together as Indians. Natasha is the author of two books, My Daughter's Mum, adapted from her popular column in Mint Lounge, and Immortal for a Moment. Natasha began her career in broadcast journalism with New Delhi Television as the first female videographer in news television in India. She quit 13 years later as vice president for training and development. She now works as an independent filmmaker, media trainer, and columnist. Natasha is a member of Karwan-e Mohabbat, a citizens' initiative that seeks justice and livelihoods for victims of hate crimes across India. She lives in New Delhi with her husband and three daughters. Okay, so firstly, happy Valentine's Day, Natasha.
Thank you. Happy Valentine's Day to you too. I hope you're doing
Um,
romantic things.
uh,
Probably this
I'm doing
podcast episode is the most romantic thing we'll be doing today.
absolutely. I think I
Better
think
make it
it's
worth it, huh?
I will try my best. But I think the reason why I'm very excited about Valentine's Day as a day this year is because I'm getting to speak to one of the most cherished authors that I have in my life, and that's you, Natasha.
Thank
And
you.
the first, no, please, honestly, like one of the first times I thought about having you and decided to speak to Sabika about it. Sabika will, I think, witness this, but I mean, she'll bear witness to this. But she did say to me that I can see how much you are inspired by her, and I'm really excited to see how this episode goes. So, firstly, I'm just glad that we could finally get to speak to you, and especially on such a beautiful day, because I mean, yes, we look at it from a romantic perspective, but I mean, love is love, right? Like there are different ways of how we love, and one of the ways I've learned to love is admire the people and the way that they write and the way they talk about their lives, and you're one of them. So, yeah, I think
Thank you.
that's that's my ode to you. Um, so maybe we can just like explore, I think, the idea of love because you especially through your writings have, I mean, to me and I think to Sabika as well, have explored the concept of love in multitude of ways. You've talked about loving your children, you've talked about loving yourself, you've talked about loving um, your husband, your family. You've, and increasingly so, I feel you've helped us understand the value of love when it comes to extending it beyond what you call your own community. And I think by virtue of that, I mean loving the place we live in, loving the people we meet, loving the conversations we have, and I think eventually loving the country that that we belong to. So maybe I'll just put this question to you: that if I had to ask you, what is the doctrine of love for India today? Um, how would you answer that question?
Oh, I think love is absolutely the most relevant idea uh, at the moment, and perhaps it always has been, but very much so at the moment because we are living in a time where we are witness to so much naked hatred, violence, apathy, uh, of, of humanity towards each other, of communities at war with each other, of governments at war with their own people, of families turning, against their own children or their own parents. And there's just the mass of hate and violence is so high in the world that we live in today That's something that we have always taken for granted, which is, the peaceful side of ourselves as humankind,
Hmm.
the that part of ourselves that nurtures, that connects, that cares. All of that is something that we have grown up assuming is an integral part of being human, and that idea is being assaulted on a daily basis. Somehow, there'll be
Yeah.
videos of lynching, there'll be videos of gang rape. um, the the mass of apathy, hatred, violence that we witness every day through our social media and through every all the screens that we have around us, it makes you kind of despair. And the only antidote to that despair is finding in ourselves the capacity to love,
Hmm.
and to be able to redefine what we mean by love. Because that's, I mean, in India particularly, we are in such a unique moment where we have this beautiful constitution that talks of fraternity, solidarity, equality, and we have what we have always assumed to be a glorious democracy that somehow manages to find balance. But suddenly, in the 21st century, we find our lives so much out of balance in terms of governance, in terms of connections between communities, and in terms of a sense of identity. I mean, simply, who am I, and where do I belong, and who values me? I mean, these are
Yeah.
questions that we are seeking answers to.
Hmm. Because you mentioned social media, I want to kind of maybe have like a before and after thing here, because when you were growing up, there was no such thing as social media. And the very concept of love, or the identity of what you think love is, was based on the way you were, I think, taught how to love. And and that came from not just being in a family or a community, but also the history that you were reading. And the you mentioned the constitution, like how you understood the constitution then. How much has that changed in the light of information? And I think this, as you said, like this naked hatred that we have somehow become a part of in our everyday lives.
Yeah, so I think that uh, you know, one of the we were having a discussion on the Constitution a while ago, in a work group, and someone said the Constitution of India is so universal that everybody identifies with it. And another person said, but do you realize that constitutional values most of the time are against cultural values? And
Hmm.
and what we were forced to look at directly in that moment as that sentence confronted us was the contradictions that we have always lived with.
Hmm.
You evoked pre-social media time when the influences on oneself were not so external in a sense. So you
Mm.
had family, you had
Hmm.
schooling, you had access to a certain number of libraries and books and television or films, and that's where you were drawing ideas from and drawing inspiration from. But even then, and I'm sure this is also the experience of your generation, we would study in school that the caste system is a thing of the past, that
Hmm.
the Constitution guarantees equal rights for everybody, irrespective of community and class status and gender. And they were, and we would read this glorious history of India, of how we came together as a people and fought off colonialism and sent the British back. And all of these are
Hmm.
very inspiring stories. We also saw it in the movies, it was in our textbooks, it was in the stories that our own grandparents were telling us. And yet, at the same time, if when you opened the newspaper or sat down for the evening news, there was still rampant caste violence. gender violence. Your own cousins were still getting married, in arranged marriage situations against their own will in many cases. um,
Hmm.
Love marriages, intercaste, interfaith marriages were being criminalized, were being, dealt with very
Ostracized.
violently.
Yeah.
So that's a contradiction that has always been there, and yet when you grow up, you grow up with the very inspiring notion that you're the generation that is going to make the change, because you can see these things in
True.
clarity, right? And I
Hmm.
have to say that certainly my generation, have, I no longer have such a rosy imagination of what we will be able to do, because I find that instead of actually being the change, we are finding ourselves resisting, being forced to become activists and resistors. And uh, I would be much happier if I could stay in the storyteller space, where I was able to
Hmm.
talk about these contradictions in a more nuanced way, in a way that we didn't necessarily have to blame one another. But
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
we find that the divisions have become so stark now, and they have become so institutionalized. You've got prime ministers and chief ministers and cabinet ministers criminalizing love. The parliament passes an ordinance, and the internet of a state is cut off. Uh,
Hmm.
People's human
Um,
rights are taken off. So I would say that if I look at social media in that context,
hmm.
I would still feel, in my experience, social media is still a tool that we can very much use to resist, uh, against these forces of hate. In a sense, it is social
Hmm.
media that is giving us some space in which we can voice opinions, in which we can put our own creativity out, and share with each other, as we are doing in this podcast, to be honest.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the way mainstream media has gone, and the way governments seem to have betrayed the principles of constitution and of what it means to be a government, it we would be really very helpless if we didn't have these alternate media to express ourselves in,
Hmm.
and to still make connections
While
with each other.
While we're still talking about social media, I can't help but note that, in some sense, part of the reason why we wanted you on our podcast today, Natasha, is because, in some sense, maybe Muslim thinks you're love personified. In a similar fashion, would you have some ideas about, on social media, who you would think of as like an influencer when it comes to redefining love, as you said right in the beginning, that we might just need to find fresh definitions for love. Anyone who's been inspiring you on social media in a similar fashion?
I will say that when I first joined social media, uh, I would
Hmm.
I would kind of keep reading one link to another. I would find myself going from one site to another, page to another, scrolling up and down timelines, and often I would stop myself and ask, "What are you looking for?" Because
Hmm.
it would seem to me as if I was looking, as if there was something I was searching for, and I could not stop scrolling because I was not finding it, or I was finding clues that would take me somewhere. And I
Hmm.
would like to put it not in terms of a person, but in terms of voices of people like you and me, who feel
Right.
drowned out in the in the loudness of the kind of mainstream world. I mean, uh, I'm as you can tell from this podcast, I'm not averse to speaking. I can talk a lot. I have many things to say, but I am that person who wouldn't speak up in class, who will be the last person to speak in a group most of the time, who who's not fighting, necessarily going to fight to find a place under the limelight, and yet
Hmm.
there are so many people who are like that, but they have very, very valuable things to say. And I think that it's a kind of person who actually took to social media in that sense, because it was a much quieter space when it started. You could say your own thing without necessarily interrupting anyone else. You could create your own space without necessarily taking it away from someone else. And that's how a lot of the blogs and the social media feeds and eventually podcasts, and a lot of YouTube channels got created, right? There's just this infinite space.
True.
And what we have seen
Hmm.
happen is that people who would never not have had an opportunity to meet each other otherwise, because we are not limelight seekers, have managed to find each other online, and that has actually given one's own ideas and one's own spirit a lot of energy. You kind of feel really isolated, and you have
Hmm.
these very kind of deep emotions which you have been made to believe are irrational, or not valid.
True.
And then you read others writing in their own quiet space, or expressing themselves, in different ways, and you find so much resonance. And so for me, it was that I was looking for a space in which you could be honest without without the fear of offending people, in which you could be honest without being, in which you could explore your own feelings and your own ideas in a way that you didn't necessarily get attacked prematurely. Things
Hmm.
things need space in which they can be nurtured, in which you can join the dots. And most conventional mainstream spaces don't do that. They value speed much more than depth in most cases. And so that is what I found online. I found people who were inspired by reading me, and and I found other people whose voices, whose conviction, whose honesty gave me, became like a role model for me.
It's a you also made me think about how social media, or even the podcasting space, I would say, like all these media is also a way for people to be a more active audience and be an active listener. And I think by virtue of becoming an active listener and an active audience, you are able to participate better in the conversations that you want to hold with the people that you want to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that it's also a space in which every person has an opportunity to discover their own creativity.
Hmm.
That hierarchy, that has been institutionalized, that some people have exceptional talent, whereas the large majority of humans are unexceptional, are ordinary. That is a lie. I
Hmm.
know that it is a lie. And I know that it has been proven again and again, by
Hmm.
scientists, by psychologists, by sociologists, by anthropologists, that every human being, every community, every society has their own unique creative streaks. And in fact, without expressing that creativity, we never fully become ourselves. and
Yeah.
I think the internet has definitely, it is a space in which more and more people across ages are able to find a space in which to be creative.
I I would like to like take this part onto another question that I've been having, especially for you, is that the way I feel Karwan Mohabbat transferred itself from being like this actual caravan of love where you were on your constantly on your foot, traveling, meeting families, and when the pandemic happened, there was so much from Karwan Mohabbat that I was learning by virtue of not being there, by not being in the same proximity as I wanted to. And how did that translate for you, who were originally meeting families, originally sitting with them, hearing their stories? Again, I think just coming back to what you were saying, that your role as a storyteller turning into an activist, like how did that play out over the course of, I would say, like a year and that we've been in this state of a pandemic?
Mhm. So, to just give you a very quick background, Karwane Mohabbat is a citizens collective that was started in 2017, in mid 2017, in August. And it was announced by Harsh Mandar. And if I had to take one name of, a person who has inspired me to become much more than I would have been, to find more resources and reserves in me to be a bigger, better human being, than it is him, than it is Harsh Mandar. Um, and So I had been reading. I'd read Harsh Mandar since 2002, when he very famously resigned from the IS in response to the violence in Gujarat, and went down to the ground to work with victims of violence and continued to do that for many years after that. So I had read him before, and in 2017 he announced the Karwani Mohabbat, and he said that considering the spate of lynchings of Muslim men that were taking place in different parts of the country, he felt very strongly that there was a link between these two. There was a pattern to this violence, and that
Mm,
in a time when victims had no recourse to justice or any kind of support, when society as well as the government and administration had abandoned them, and were not playing the role that they had traditionally played, then somebody had to get up and extend their hand and grieve with the people who were grieving, hold their hand, tell them they were not alone, and offer them whatever help they needed. So at that point, 2017 was also a time when really these acts of violence were peaking.
yeah.
Bailu Khan, Junaid, Akhlaq. I mean, these had been these very high, they had been in the media glare, these lynchings. And there had been many more in Assam, in Mangalore, in Jharkhand.
Mm,
So at that point, we were also as a couple, as my husband and I, in a space where we could see that something terrible was happening around us and feeling very helpless about it. So when Harshmanda reached out, and our children at that point, my youngest was 9 at that time, and we felt that okay, one of us can stay with the children and the other one can go out. And I chose to join Harshmandar on this journey.
mm,
I thought it would be for 3 or 4 months, but the lynchings didn't stop. They continued, and we found ourselves traveling every month to a new state to meet 4 or 5 families that had been, destroyed by
mm,
violence. And around that time, we kind of organized ourselves a little better, and we created a legal team to help victims get justice, a psychosocial support team that was helping them through their health, education, psychological needs. and uh, a media team. And because I had a background in media, um, and I'd been an independent filmmaker for a while, and I was also a writer. So I kind of, we created a media team, and we began to document each one of these stories. And along with that, we began to document the positive stories of love and plurality that exist in every nook and corner of this country. So the stories that we had always taken for granted that had become passe for us, that there's a mosque and a temple and they share a wall, or
Yeah.
that a Muslim is selling flowers outside a temple, or a lot of these, or interfaith dargahs, etc. So we began to tell these stories all over again, because we were living in a time where this cultural plurality was being denied, where we were being asked to believe that we were actually a civilization that could not live in peace with each other. And we knew that in our hearts and minds and souls and bodies, we know
Hmm.
that it is a lie, because each one of us comes from a family that is a lived example of this kind of plurality, of getting along with people. That's what,
Hmm.
for us, that's what it means to be an Indian, to be part of the civilization. So we also began to tell those stories. And our work took us to Assam, where there was the citizenship conflict, because the first NRC was announced in Assam. We began to work with people who were being denied citizenship, who were being put in detention camps, which is something that prepared us to respond immediately when the CAA was announced in December,
Mm.
in December
2019.
2019.
Yeah.
And so, because we were already on the ground, we were already a group, we had already worked with conflicts around citizenship and the marginalization of a community, we were immediately able to respond. And Harsh was, he was he was spearheading it.
Hmm.
So and of course, at that point, many groups came together. Groups that worked with hunger, with feminist issues, with agriculture, with dams, lawyers. People banded together as soon as the anti-CA protests began, very spontaneously in India, and we realized that our role was to offer the support that the protesters needed wherever there were sit-in protests. And of
Hmm.
course, that went into the violence in Delhi, which was a shock. And we immediately went into relief mode, because we were all still together, and we were all also in Delhi. And as soon as we were, kind of finding our feet with rehabilitation measures for those affected by the violence in Northeast Delhi, the lockdown was announced.
Hmm.
And while the lockdown for many others became a time when they could not go out to work, when they were locked into their homes, for members of the Karwani Mohabbat and all of these other organizations that had come together, lots of NGOs, lots of citizens groups, it immediately, the lockdown catapulted within 2 or 3 days into the largest hunger crisis that not only India but the world had ever seen. And then it became the largest migrant crisis that
Hmm.
happened. So those days are etched in my mind. I can remember them as day one, day two, day three. And we just went into action mode. There was no other way to respond. So every night from 10 o'clock till about 11:30, we were in meeting mode. Where are we going to get the funds from? How are we going to transfer food from this state to that state? Who do we know here? And then so we immediately began to distribute food to as many places and as many communities as we could. And because we had that access, because the police would allow a car full of food sacks to go out even in lockdown, we knew that we had to document it. So we began to make these films, which went into millions of views in the first few months, and are the main reason that we had a worldwide funding campaign.
Yeah.
By the end of it, we had
I remember those.
crores of rupees
Yeah.
that came in, and that got spent immediately.
Hmm.
So it really was a whirlwind, and it was a lesson in constantly a lesson in contradictions. That while on the one hand we can have a government that can abandon its own people so ruthlessly, we at the same time immediately have this large group of citizens who have never met each other, don't know each other, who just band together on the internet and make sure that as much money is sent in to as many people who have the capacity to distribute food. So
Hmm.
it was, there's this miracle happening on the one side, and you know that you must respond to it because you are you're the pipeline in a sense.
Yeah, it's a lot of what you mentioned about Karwane Mohabbat, and to all our listeners, we will be sharing links about Karwane Mohabbat for more details, and please check out the work that they've been doing. Um, One of the things that I picked up while you were sharing with us these details is that I don't know why, but what you just said about people feeling that they don't care about each other, and there's always been this disparity when it comes to taking care of one another. It doesn't reflect when crisis strikes. Like, you would not shy away from going out of your way to help someone. However, increasingly so, and I say that from experience of hearing conversations within a larger family circle, larger friend circle, that if polarization is happening, if things are getting difficult between, say, the Muslims and the Hindus, and there are views around how Muslims are being treated in the country, or that there are disparities between these two communities, people have come out and said that these disparities always existed, and now someone is just being given a sort of like they're just they being said that, oh yeah, you can say these things that you always, like, if you were Islamophobic, you did not say it out loud because it would be taken not well. But now, of course, with everything that's happening around the country and the way the government is behaving, you can get away with it. And that it doesn't disappoint me. Like, it discourages me to a degree, that how much have we gone down to the level of apathy? Do we not really care about the person that is a human being beyond the scope of their religious, sexual, or any other kind of identity? And what you're telling me is that you saw, in a way, like, you are a witness to both, you know
Yes.
from a and I would always want to be, like, on the side where I can believe in that sense of community regardless of where we come from. So I guess what I'm really coming to is, how do we help each one of us reflect on this humanity more strongly than all the differences that are being exaggerated and hyphenated in front of us?
Yeah. What you're saying is so is something that we hear so often. No, we are being fed with what I would call, openly call, a very very dumbed down analysis of of why things are happening as they are happening. There is a it's not like it's for example, it's true that hate and violence is being rewarded in this time, and of course what will be rewarded is what will be encouraged. So you will see more and more of it because people can get away with it. At the same time, I mean, if you look at it in terms of the unit of an individual, if you look at it in terms of one person or one child,
Hmm.
you encourage that person, or you reward that person for doing bad things, and the person is likely to do them more and more. because that
Mm.
is what gives them validation. That's what gives them a sense of belonging. That's what that's what is being encouraged. At the same time, you give the same person an environment in which he or she is rewarded for being peaceful, for being thoughtful, for for being nurturing of the self as well as of the other, and sure enough they will respond, right? That's
Yeah.
common sense.
Mm.
uh, Now to start kind of essentializing, and to start making these large generalizations, that if one mob has behaved in this way, then that means that everybody else or anybody else who exists is part of the same mob. Or
Mm.
if somebody stayed quiet when they witnessed something, then it means that they are complicit or that they wanted it to happen. You're not looking at the complexities of human psychology, which have been studied so deeply uh, by social scientists, which
Mm.
are understood so deeply. You don't necessarily have to have a course in psychology or anthropology. They are understood implicitly, innately by many people. And
Yeah.
so just because you're constantly repeating a lie, which is that, oh, everybody was always full of hate, and now the minute they got the opportunity to express it, they've begun to do that, it does not become a bigger truth than the fact that the same people would not be behaving in this way if you were not rewarding it in the way that you
Yeah.
are. I mean, it's almost common sense. So doing something wrong, then continuously banding it around as if there is no other alternative to the way in which it is being done, these things need to be called out. And the tragedy of our times is that, this painstakingly created phenomena of the mainstream media, which we thought would, was progress, actually completely crumbled in the face of power, and completely crumbled in the because of the structure inherent in it, which is that it responds to corporate advertising. It
Mm.
cannot exist without
Yeah.
money being pumped into it, so it will go where the money is. Um, so you, just taking one example and trying to generalize it is absolutely, it makes no sense. It would be like saying, oh, here's this president in one country and she's so good, so every other country should have a woman
Yeah.
president and it will work. I mean, this is infantile analysis. So we really literally have to resist that through our own words, through our own actions, through our own
Talking about
conversations.
talking about examples, actually, you know, and this is like again like that topic which in the course of how the mainstream politics and the mainstream media has constantly projected it as, and like the interfaith marriages, the interfaith couples, there has been so much emphasis on the news around how, I mean, it's horrifying to a degree that people just don't cannot ever, like, I feel in general conversations they just feel that that is de facto a problem or a problematic choice if you're choosing to be in an interfaith union. And in I think I'm seeing it from an audience perspective here, but when the India Love project started, I felt like the growing number of likes and the growing number of followers on that page is only helping people really like break down that one bad example myth that they choose to live with all their lives, and make that as the example to define like this is a bad choice for each and everyone, like for the entire world or the community, like this just doesn't work. And the number of examples and the number of these stories that are being shared on India Love project, and again, to everyone who's listening, we will be sharing details about that as well. I think on our Instagram page we share a lot of posts of India Love project, so I believe most of the listeners would be aware of that. But We need those examples, even if it is very basic. I mean, I'm not saying if you are choosing to go the interfaith way, it is so different from choosing to not go that way. I think the biggest step is that you are learning to love someone. I think that for me is the biggest journey that people can make. and
Absolutely.
and that's the biggest commitment that they can give to themselves and their respective partner. um, but that said, just having this beautiful compilation of stories accessible to each every one of us does give you a lot of, I think, comfort and nourishment in the times that we are presently living in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I might as well add that today on the 14th of Feb is when we are in my immediate family celebrating the union of two faiths. My younger sister is getting married tomorrow to Sanjeev Rao, and I would love to add another story to the India Love project. At some point, sooner or later, we'll have pictures to donate. But yeah, Natasha, it's just actually been completely, I mean, more than anything else, just like one of those things which you can look at last thing in the night and sleep a little happier,
Yeah.
that the world isn't what it's being made out to be.
My daughters pick up my phone every day, and one of them will read out aloud the new India Love Project story to the other. And they're not um, uh, girls who are otherwise seeking love stories. If they're watching a serial or a film, they'll be like, can they just leave out these love scenes, and why do they always have to go on and on about love interests? So but there's something about ILP, about the realness of it, about the just the bare honesty of it. I mean, the stories tinkle with laughter, many of them.
Hmm.
And there are only three photographs, but you can see a life well lived. And I see that of all the things that they pick up from the media in a day, this is the one thing that is positive, that is beautiful, that gives them hope. So there's
Right.
the power of the most simplest of storytelling, and why it has become important in a time like this.
um, I think while we are on this topic, I mean, India Love Project has completely, I think, allowed all of us to think beyond the limited few examples that we often lived with or had. And you have this compendium of sorts. The other aspect, Natasha, that we want to like hear from you, and again, I think circling back to the idea of love, not just with the family and the life that you build, but also the place that you live in. You have shared this through your writings that before you chose to get married to your husband, there were reservations and there were questions around how this will not work. By virtue of, I mean, I feel, I mean, again, from your writings, that's my feeling that your marriage and your relationship and essentially your companionship, without really trying, kind of proves that this is just two people wanting to be together and they're happy, and but did that come with this, I mean, when you were writing about it publicly, was there ever this worry that that your love can attract hate from others, from people you don't know maybe?
Hmm. Um, so my essays that used to earlier appear in Mint Lounge and then got compiled in my books. Um, the uh, Each one of them is kind of um, crafted with great care. And
Hmm.
by the time I finished writing any of them, I had absolutely no fear about putting them out. I had absolutely no self consciousness about whether it was, all of those things that you are kind of learned, all those learned embarrassments about, is this too much information? Should I really talk about personal in a public space, etc.? All of those questions I would have dealt with in the process of writing. I no, I don't. I by the time I would finish writing it and be able to make the connection, I think one of the first essays was when I looked at my grandmother, my mother-in-law in prayer, and all it evoked was the visual of my own grandmother in prayer, someone I had lost when I was 8 years old, and to so for me it was a bridge, something that I had lost, I had found again in my own life, and I wrote about it, and with that was the thought of constantly being told that we are so different, you and I, and that their family and our family is so different that there would be nothing in common. And here I am witnessing and feeling something that is so deeply common, which is the nurturing hand of an older woman on me, telling me, making me feel that I am safe to love and raise
Mm.
my children in this space. So I think that was one of the first essays. It wasn't even about my husband and me, it was just about what are these differences that we were talking about when actually our experience is so much to the contrary of it. And I never felt that there would be anybody who would misunderstand this. Of course, eventually there was a lot of trolling that one got on Twitter. Once in a while, it became very, very hard. The first time I was trolled very, very harshly for an article I had written called "Say Sorry to Shah Rukh Khan." I actually moved out of my house to my brother's home for 2 nights, just to be in a safe space, because my husband was not in
Mm.
town, and and I was getting these very, very personalized attacks, and they were naming my children, etc. So I went through that. I went through extreme terror of being attacked, and and yet when time passes, you realize that it's not personal, that it's part of this whole hate ecosphere that is being created uh, by uh, by people who want to take control of the narrative of the times, and that the you have only two choices, right, which is to become a victim of it, or to find in yourself the strength to stand up to it. And
Mm.
you know it's very obvious what you're going to do, right?
Um, Honestly, this is such a, I mean, just what you said makes me feel so compelled to 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 talk about this more and more, to talk about, because what you said about people trying to control the narrative, right? Now, their narrative cannot define your life. And I
Absolutely
feel
not. Yeah.
hate is what, I think hate comes from this self-concerned idea of how everything must be in the order that you want,
Hmm.
and anything that jars that order needs to be vanquished, needs to be silenced. I feel more and more, especially in our times that we live in, the hate part, like you said, you were trolled. You weren't trolled by people who know you, right?
Yeah, they didn't know me exactly.
You were trolled by people who would want to just make sure that your story doesn't become part of their stories.
Yeah, yeah, I was told by people with the possibly with the intention that I would never write something like this
Hmm.
again. uh, yeah, and I also was relentlessly trolled for about 3 years by a particular stalker who would create accounts on Twitter with distortion of my name, uh, and then attack me. So there would be accounts that would turn up with my profile photo called Nangi Natasha. There would be accounts that would be lesbian Natasha. It
Hmm.
would pick up from my name and from my tweets and attack me for what I had written in my columns. And I mean, their friends of mine would get scared. They would be like, mm, you know, you need to silence yourself because this can get dangerous. I knew that I had to do something, but it was never that I had to change the way I wrote or change the way I think. My learning from that was that I have to find support, I have to ask for help, I have to make this visible. Instead of suffering silently and allowing it to get to me, I have to expose this to the world. So it didn't come naturally to me because that's when my own privacy would
Hmm.
kick in. I don't want to go on Twitter and say I'm in trouble, help me. That didn't come naturally to me, but I learned to do that because, well, that's also how you connect to people. That's
And
also how you
Hmm.
kind of use the collective resources of people who don't want a voice like mine to be destroyed or pushed back.
Natasha, I'm actually just going back to the beginning of this conversation now, because in the starting you mentioned how at a time when you were growing up, there were arranged marriages happening where women were getting married without their free will. They were being forced into a kind of system that didn't give them the respect, the agency, and I don't want to say choose, but isn't this what we're talking about in the same we're talking about like two sides of the same coin, that there will be people trying to silence you for who you are, whether there will be someone who's being pushed into a setup that they don't want to be part of, or it will be pushed into a setup where if they choose to be on their own, then they are being questioned for it and being threatened for it. So regardless of the choice you make, you will have to stand up for yourself at some point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the lessons you learn in adulthood. It comes as a bit of a rude shock that either I mean, there's that line in the movie Queen, right, where she says, "Mera hal to Gupta ji jaisa ho gaya hai." Where she's kind of saying, I was so obedient, I listened to everybody, I always did the right thing, and it still happened to me. And just kind of crashing over it. It's pretty much a lesson for everybody. You're not going to escape. You are not going to be able to, in under any circumstances, find that you can lie low or you can be compliant and you will not be vulnerable to the same
Yeah,
things that other people are. You will be. And
yeah,
no human being is a single unit, right?
yeah.
um,
I,
Somebody
Right.
very close to you will be affected, and will you not speak up for them? You will.
yeah. And then the same, I think, applies for when you want to stand up for yourself as an Indian that you are, as the identity that you choose to live with a more pronounced manner. I think on Maybe Muslim, the conversations, the reason why Sabika and I started having conversations were because her and my idea of living as Indian Muslims is very different. But for the longest period of our lives, I think way into our adulthoods, there was a part of this identity that we weren't comfortable with, you know.
Yeah.
And then after a point, I realized, and I remember that realization happening because I did some very uncomfortable things. Because by virtue of uncomfortable, I mean things that I was asked not to do growing up. That there was always a sort of set of rules that you abide by, and the way you are asked to be a Muslim, expected to be a Muslim. And I think that evolution got me closer to being more of I can say, an Indian Muslim than that, that I would say the indoctrination or the subscription towards a religion would have done for me. And I realized that, again, had I not made those uncomfortable choices in my life, I wouldn't be as respectful towards my identity as an Indian Muslim as I am probably today.
Yeah, and
Um,
just adding to that, I was also sort of curious as to, like being married into a Muslim family and, sort of being probably the same kind of Muslim that Mariam and I are, fringe Muslims, Muslims from a distance. I also was really curious about what would the words "मैं भी Muslim" even mean to you, Natasha. I mean, because for us, the game changer is the word "bhi." Like saying "मैं Muslim" is very different from saying "मैं भी Muslim." And then, of course, the next step would be मैं Muslim bhi. It's just one of the many identities.
Absolutely.
And I mean, of course, there are ratios. You might just be a 0.01% Muslim, but even that 0.01% is worthy of being fought for. Anything you are is worthy of being fought for. So, just also wanted to understand your relationship with these three words.
Yeah. So, when my when my husband in the very early days, so his identity is very clear to him. He's a practicing Muslim. There's no questions asked. He belongs to his family, to his village, to his religion, to his university group, his his group of friends. He has no. There are no ifs and buts in his sense of belonging. I,
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand, am born into a majority community, and that too a very interesting religious identity, the Hindu identity. And I say that because it's so fluid, it's so diverse. Like, of course, every religious identity is, particularly Muslims, also very diverse. Um, but there's almost in the Hindu family I grew up in, there was nothing to subscribe to, almost. It didn't matter
Mm-hmm.
whether you prayed or not. It didn't matter whether you went to the mandir or not. It was a very you just were there were no questions asked. There was nothing that was expected of you in return for belonging. um,
Mm-hmm.
so, and by the time and as a woman, and I know that both of you will identify with this a little bit, as a woman you actually question every identity very early in your life, because each
mm,
one of them is
True.
stained by patriarchy, right?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, even belonging to your family is stained by the fact that your brother is treated differently from you, by the fact that anybody can come and say anything to your mother and nobody will speak up for her. That your mother seems to have willingly accepted a position that you are rebelling against, that even she doesn't want you to kind of grow into. So your identity as a woman in this kind of Indian and world culture actually makes you question every other identity that
That is
is
so true.
thrust upon you, in a sense. So I was perfectly happy to drop being Punjabi because I didn't like this notion of Punjabi glory, in which many partition families could actually show off their valor by saying that we killed our daughters with our own hands rather than have them be kidnapped by the other community.
Hmm.
And what sounded like valor to the person who was saying it, to me, who was a daughter as a child, did
Hmm.
not did not in any way sound like a positive thing. I mean, why would you do that to me? Why would you ever give up protecting me? So I questioned belonging to the greater Punjabi community in the light of those kind of stories. I questioned belonging to the Hindu community, a small incident in a temple where you're told to cover your head and you don't want to cover your head, and you say, well, I'm never going to come back here. And you're allowed. There's a lot of space in which you can kind of exist. So when my husband brought up me being Hindu, I said, don't worry, I'm not a Hindu. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. Don't thrust that on me.
Mm.
Um,
That's so
and
interesting because
and
even
and
I had been actually going around saying saying maybe Sikh, because like when the actual like the CNRC protests were happening, and after that when the riots happened, there was so much of community service that
Mhm.
I found myself doing. And for me, if there is one community that really sort of stands up every single time, at least in my eyes, the kind of respect I have for the Sikh community, I don't for very many other like religious sects. So
Yeah,
yes, so I mean, like it's
I
very
think
interesting when you say that
I think
I'm
there's
not
something
Hindu.
about being Indian
Not
that
really.
allows us to enter and exit communities like that. You know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could say I'm
Exactly.
not a
Mm.
Punjabi. I was growing up in Bihar and Bengal, and who is to say I don't belong to Bihar when I was born there?
Hmm.
You know, uh,
Yeah.
and when I'm visiting my family in Delhi and Punjab, and they are pointing out our Bihari accents to us and mocking us for eating rice rather than roti, we're like, well, you kind of you reject the put down by saying, yes, I am a Bihari. What are you going to do about it? So there's something about being in a plural culture that allows you actually to wear different cloaks at different times. Just because I say I'm not a Punjabi doesn't mean I'm going to cease to be one. Just because I fight with my father
Mm.
doesn't mean I'm going to, not be his beloved daughter. So, the more space there is in any of these relationships, the more you're able to rebel, the more you're able to belong, the more you're able to return to them.
Hmm.
About being Muslim, so it was very much we knew as a couple we knew uh, that it would mar our love and our sense of who we are if either of us had any expectation from the other to adopt or reject any religion in any way. So we were very mindful, without ever really talking about it, of ensuring that the other was completely comfortable in his or her skin when we were in, with each other's families. So I I'll tell you when the Muslim identity began to affect me and move me is when my daughters, who are growing up in a nuclear family with a Muslim father and a Hindu mother, uh, began to see themselves as Muslims, and I was surprised, and it was not something I had expected. And I realized that I, this is my majoritarian bias, that I assume that if you have to choose, you will choose the majority.
Mm.
And here they were, because he practices being a Muslim, and because when we spend time with my husband's family, there is a very visible identity to belong to. They are attracted to it, and they find in it a sense of belonging. And of course it's the same with they have the same feelings about being Hindu like I did. As you can be a Hindu when you want to, you can ignore it when you want to. You can be a Muslim and a Hindu when you want to. There are no contradictions there. So in that sense, I mean, as the mother of a Muslim women, as the lover of a Muslim man, of course, may be Muslim, and as the daughter-in-law of Ammi. And Papa, of course, मैं भी Muslim.
Um, that's such a remarkable way of putting it, and I mean, I would just like to end it there because I really want this to be the some of the final words that our listeners and I think both of us also take away tonight. Um, because it's just beautiful, it's humbling, it is refreshing, and I think more than anything it is honestly, I mean, if I can say, it's up for grabs for everyone, you know. We live in a pluralistic society. Always have had the access to the diversity that we have constantly been told we belong to. So why not really work on that? Why not really like really like join the party?
Absolutely, and embrace it all.
Yeah. um I think that's all I want to say, honestly. Sabika, do you have any final words that you want to?
I've always growing up found happy we day sound a little off, but when you turn the letter V into a W-E wala V, there's something very gratifying about it. So I would like to wish Natasha and everybody who's listening a happy hum day. Let's come together today and
Thank
just
you.
celebrate humming. Thank you, Natasha, for being
Thank
here.
you for this
Like
conversation. It was lovely.
I think it's the pleasure is all ours, and I'm just so glad that we could have this conversation.